On the morning of September 18, 1989, Canton Township felt ordinary sprinklers ticking across neat lawns, commuters easing onto Ford Road until a silence fell so heavy you could almost hear it thud. A construction worker swerved when two cracks punched the air sharp, controlled, wrong. Moments later, a young mother would be found face down in the tall grass off Ford and Gottfredson, while her blue Ford with the white vinyl top idled elsewhere, driver's door yawning open like a warning. Her name was Beverly Wivell, 30 years old, steady, protective, trying to restart a life after a hard season. Hours before, she'd kissed her son goodbye outside middle school. Hours later, a community would shatter. This was no smash and grab, no random drift of violence. The scene looked almost curated purse left, engine running, shoes out of place, and a chilling lack of blood where she was found. Whoever orchestrated this understood time, distance, and terror. And for 35 years, that orchestration held. You can feel it now, can't you? The way a normal Monday can turn and look at you with a stranger's eyes. If you've watched cold case files, you know the sensation a story freezes. Then decades later, science taps the glass and it cracks. In 2024, that crack became a fracture. Forensic DNA resurrected what memory could not, sifting past rumor and rumor's shadow to land on a name with a history that didn't match the mask. But a name is not a verdict. Courtrooms breathe on rules, not on rage. Tonight, we walk the timeline minute by minute from a school curb in suburban Michigan to the hard geometry of a courtroom 30-plus years later. You'll meet the investigators who refused to quit, the family who carried grief like an heirloom, and the suspect who says the evidence is wrong. Stay with me. Hit subscribe and like, so this story reaches the next pair of eyes that might remember one detail from 1989. It only takes one voice to turn a cold case hot. Now let's roll back the clock. Title card fades up. Beverly Wivell, Canton Township, Michigan, Sept. 18, 1989. The score narrows to a low, steady pulse as the frame holds for a breath, then drifts into motion. We track the morning by minutes, not memories. 8:15 a.m. A curb beside a brick middle school. Beverly leans across the bench seat, kisses her son's hair, and gives the kind of goodbye you never think could be the last. She signals, merges, and the blue Ford Fairmont with its chalked white vinyl top glides back into suburban flow. You can feel how ordinary this is, and how fragile ordinary can be. For now. Micro-timeline begins. 8:20 to 8:50 a.m. A quiet pullover on a lesser-traveled stretch, late summer sun through the windshield, a seatbelt unclicked for a breath. We cut to a dashboard clock, the second hand keeping faith with time, even when people don't. A sprinkler whispers across a yard. A bell rings somewhere off-screen. A crow cuts through the frame and vanishes behind trees. Then the calm stops pretending. At the edge of that stillness, someone makes a choice. Somewhere. Routine becomes opportunity, and opportunity becomes control. Mapcrawl, a clean white trace, draws across the township school to pull over to the near crossroads, overlay text in miles and minutes to orient the story. If you've watched cold case files, you know the ritual: fix the roads, fix the time, then ask what doesn't belong. Approximately 8:55 a.m., a pickup heads south on Gottfredson, coffee steaming in a metal thermos. Approximately 9:00 a.m., two crisp reports punch the air. A driver flinches and corrects. Gravel spits from a shoulder. Farther off, somewhere between hedgerow and ditch, a blue car accelerates harder than it should. The moment arrives, and then it is over, and the neighborhood pretends it heard nothing at all. First unit rolls. siren throttled to silent as lights wash the map in rotating red and blue. The lens glides from asphalt to prairie grass, from a yawning driver's door to an idling engine that should have a driver and doesn't. None of it is loud. That's the problem. Violence rarely shouts. It edits. It cuts out what explains the rest. Radio traffic is terse, professional, human units marking coordinates, securing a perimeter, trying to catch the day before it hardens. The setup is simple, the implications are not. A mother who kept going, a car that keeps running, a street that keeps its secrets. What happens next depends on how well we understand what already happened. We rewind to her last ordinary morning, not because it is painless, but because everything after it grows from its quiet. The house lifts into the day, the way Michigan houses do in late September coffee burbles. The AC hums. A local station reads the commute. Beverly ties back her hair, checks the clock, and inventories small promises drop her son at school. Ask about the library job. Maybe grab milk on the way home. She drives streets that know her, curves the Fairmont has memorized. Her son rides shotgun with the careless grace of 13 backpack crooked, one lace refusing to cooperate. She reminds him about a worksheet. He claims it's done. They share a sideways grin that forgives the doubt. Routine is their shared language. For a few minutes it says, "We're okay." At the curb outside the brick school, she leans across the bench seat and kisses his hair. The bell hasn't rung. They've bought 30 extra seconds for goodbye. "Love you," he says, half embarrassed, half sincere. "Love you more," she answers, because that's the rule that never fails. He joins the river of kids and disappears through the doors. She watches a beat longer than necessary. Then the engine nudges her forward, back into the grid of small errands. The plan is simple. Stop at the library to ask about part-time hours. Call her mother later. Consider dinner. Money is a worry. Hope is stubborn. She is rebuilding, mile by mile, errand by errand. The camera rides dash level. Late summer light turns lawns to soft rectangles. A jogger waves without breaking pace. She lowers a window and lets air tumble in. You think mornings are predictable until they aren't. Psychologists call this a window of temporal vulnerability, the loosened hour after the drop-off, when your schedule is private and your path looks improvisational. Predictability stops being armor and becomes a map. If someone has studied you, your leaving times, your pauses, the quiet places you become easier to approach, harder to see, the minutes after 8:30 a.m. can narrow into a door only two people notice. Beverly pulls onto a lesser-traveled stretch to gather herself before the library visit. The Fairmont idles. Heat lifts from the hood. From a distance, the car is an ordinary blue rectangle tucked against a shoulder of quiet. Up close, it's a private room the size of a front seat. She thinks about forms to fill, hours to juggle, small things that make a life behave. We widen the frame. Across town, sprinklers tick. A mail carrier loops the block. At a construction site, a foreman checks his watch. The hum reassures you that nothing catastrophic can happen while everyone is this busy. It also drowns out small sounds of footstep in gravel. A door opening when it shouldn't. A second shadow crossing yours. Viewers of cold case files know investigators return to these unglamorous minutes because this is where the seam splits. The question isn't only who or why, it's how the ordinary failed to defend a person who did everything ordinary asks. Did someone track her routines? Did someone know the common stops between school and library? Did a watcher study where the houses thin and the trees thicken? Beverly checks her mirrors the way careful drivers do, sees nothing strange, and squares her shoulders for the next errand. A simple pivot ignition, signal, merge. The map we traced moments ago is still waiting to be traveled, but now each turn contains a possibility it didn't hold 10 minutes earlier. We keep it quiet, because she keeps it quiet. The camera, our patient witness, floats a few car lengths behind as the Fairmont eases back into motion. She carries her hope toward a crossroads of asphalt and intention, unaware of the eyes that may have been waiting for this exact lull. Somewhere behind the trees, someone else's morning is tuning itself to hers, choosing distance, choosing time, choosing the moment when predictability no longer protects. And when that moment arrives, it looks exactly like any other minute until it doesn't. Nothing warns you louder than quiet routines. Today, the neighborhood keeps moving, but the morning's rhythm has changed, and you feel it in the way tires hum a little faster on the 2-lane. By the time the radio clock stutters toward 9, the township is a mosaic of errands and one place where ordinary has already broken. The first patrol unit arrives with lights running silent, because sound doesn't help you listen. The cruiser noses onto the shoulder by the scrub, and the officer steps out alert, economical, refusing to telegraph fear. He calls once police. Then he sees her. Beverly lies partly veiled by grass, close enough to the ditch that a driver could have missed her by inches. He eats a breath and does what training demands: freeze the image. Move the radio, not your feet. Coordinates first, then requests medical, backup, perimeter. The voice is steady. He reads what the wind and the perpetrator left undisturbed. A scuff along fabric. A shoe angled a little wrong. The suggestion of friction that doesn't match the softness underfoot. And there is something else. What should be here, in quantity, is not. The ground is not saturated. The blades are not matted. Blood is not telling the story you expect it to tell. The body is here. The violence speaks from somewhere else. That absence becomes a compass. If this is a resting place, not the last struggle, somewhere close or far, a separate scene is waiting. His gaze follows the margins, the shoulder, the turnouts, the breaks in hedgerow where a vehicle might have idled or a door might have opened. He learns the silence. More units stitch the roadway with light. Yellow tape breathes against a post. The sergeant arrives and draws a slow circle with his eyes, sketching a map in his head: ingress, egress, sight lines, cover. The decision is simple. The work is not. Secure what you have. Look for what you don't. A second team expands the search in widening arcs. Neighbors step onto porches and stop at the tape. Then, less than an hour later, a call that is not a coincidence: a blue Ford Fairmont with a white vinyl top sits alone at Griffin Park. Engine running. Driver's door open. Purse on the front seat, like an apology. The first officer to reach it pauses. He touches nothing. He looks first. The door hangs a few degrees wider than casual. The seat holds that quick exit angle. The way a person leaves when leaving is not negotiated. Keys rest where they make the least and the most sense at once. There's cash in the purse, identification tucked where it belongs. A small constellation of daily life unmoved by the worst thing that could have happened. Robbery is not your motive. Panic is not your staging. Something more deliberate is. When the park unit relays details, the road unit hears the missing blood again. The map in the sergeant's head redraws into 2 anchors: body here, car there. The line between them is not only geographic, it is narrative. You do not leave an engine running and a door yawning unless time is your ally or your enemy. You do not place a purse like that unless you are saying something about who you are not. It reads like an episode of Cold Case Files, but this is real. The crew moves the way real crews do. They grid the grass, photograph before they touch, and bag the air with patience. At the park, They dust what makes sense and swab what might argue back in 20 or 30 years. They cut the ignition. Quiet follows. What the two scenes offer merges into a single, unsettling thesis. The tall grass is likely a dump site, not a kill site. The park is a stage where control was exercised and then abandoned in haste. Absence, in forensics, is a presence with a different name. Less blood is evidence of movement. The distances measured in miles and in minutes become the first truthful witness. Back at the shoulder, the officer leans his forearm into the cruiser's roofline and writes in block letters, because you don't spell a life in cursive when clarity matters. At the park, a detective notes the door's angle. Between them lies a thread that won't look like a rope until someone braids it. Today is for preserving fibers. Neighbors retreat with a new inventory: what they heard, what they didn't, what they chose not to notice. The tape clicks in the wind. The map freezes on 2 points of light. The story refuses to be one scene, because the person who made it two wanted it that way. 2 points to start from, and a long road between. Still. They begin where the evidence insists, not where fear points. 2 scenes, 1 pattern. At Griffin Park, the blue Fairmont waits, its engine quiet under gloved hands. The purse sits on the front seat with cash and identification intact. Cards are stacked as if the day were still proceeding. Detectives do not say it aloud yet, but a conclusion settles if robbery was the motive. It behaved with strange courtesy. Violence that takes a life and spares money sends a different message. So triage pivots to what the perpetrator could not fully curate. A photographer moves clockwise, fixing the car's posture, the angle of the driver's door, the faint scuff on the sill plate. A latent print tech dusts smooth surfaces, window glass, mirror stems, steering wheel spokes, the belt buckle edge catching ridge detail when it offers itself, accepting the blank when it does not. Swabs pass over the gear selector and interior handle. Tape lifts flirt with fibers in the seat seams. Every bag is labeled, sealed, signed. Back at the roadside, the grass is treated like a page torn from a larger book. Grid lines try to impose modest order on indifferent nature. Investigators recover small truths: a hair that refuses the wind, a fiber that gleams when light tilts just so, chafing on fabric where a hand likely insisted. What is missing still instructs. The relative lack of blood tells a negative story louder than spatter would have been. Someone moved her, separating cause from discovery. Medical examiners and nurses meet the moment with disciplined compassion. The sexual assault evidence kit, the SAE kit, becomes careful. Methodical work swabs, clippings, slides, envelopes, each sealed with initials, each transfer documented in neat handwriting. In 1989, the kit is insurance against someday. It is also a dare to the future: keep improving until this speaks. Clothing is dried and paper bagged, never plastic. A single hair, an epithelial cell, a trace unknown hand, each is given a number and a chain of custody. In the lab, evidence handlers talk less and label more. Fingerprints, if they exist, betray grip and habit: thumb high or low on the wheel, the way a nervous driver anchors with the pinky, whether a right-handed person yanked the door. But prints may be absent altogether. People who stage scenes wear gloves or wipe selectively. Fibers make quieter promises. They ride fabrics like hitchhikers and build accidental bridges between landscapes: car carpet to pant cuff, trunk liner to seat back, prairie grass to hem. And if biology speaks later, fibers speak now. Psychology shadows the checklist. The offender's choices suggest forensic awareness: literate, not necessarily professional, but rehearsed. Engine left running, that turns noise into cover, inviting passers-by to think emergency without stopping to study it. Purse presented intact, that is motive misdirection. 2 locations. That is dilution by design, split the narrative so neither scene can fully confess. He anticipates first questions and plants answers that feel true until tested. Investigators answer by refusing to hurry their questions. They stage their own restraint gloves changed between tasks. Tools swapped rather than wiped. Notes written like they will be read in court 5 winters from now. Every contact is contamination or clarity. They behave like both could matter equally. They collect negatives, the absence of pry marks, the absence of ransack, the absence of a wallet tossed where panic might drop it. Absence gets its own evidence bag, because absence can testify. By sunset, day 1 has yielded what it will: photographs, lifts, swabs, a measured map, and the start of a story that resists neatness. The purse says this was not theft. The kit says this was not mercy. The fibers say 2 places tried to pretend they were one. The body says someone planned enough to move her, to buy time, to make silence do part of the labor. Cold patience meets cold planning. Somewhere a man believes he minimized himself inside the margins. He did not. The margins remember. The work continues behind a closed door where the light is bright and the language is careful. Autopsy here is not spectacle, it is service. A forensic pathologist stands at the crossing of medicine and law, speaking for someone who cannot, and every sentence is a promise to stay precise. Beverly is identified, documented, and treated with the dignity she was due in life. Chain of custody is affirmed, photographs taken for record, clothing preserved for separate examination. Notes are written in clear block letters because clarity survives years better than flourish. Findings begin with the obvious and move toward the necessary. There is a fatal gunshot injury to the chest. Range estimation will rely on laboratory testing of clothing and residues rather than conjecture. There is an additional gunshot injury directed at the head and mouth, a pattern sometimes associated with silencing or rage, though the report does not interpret motive. Trajectories are charted. Entry and exit are characterized. Relative positions are modeled with angles and measurements so later readers can understand what the body has already said. Toxicology samples are drawn and sealed. Fingernail clippings and hair combings are collected with deliberate care. Swabs taken during the sexual assault examination begun at the hospital and completed under forensic protocol are inventoried, dried, and packaged. The kit is not a conclusion, it is an opportunity. In 1989, that opportunity looked small. In the years to come, it will grow, because science tends to keep its promises when paperwork is patient. There are superficial abrasions and patterned marks consistent with a struggle. But the most telling feature matches what the roadside already suggested: an absence of heavy external blood at the recovery location. Internal findings align with transport after injury. That distinction matters. It changes timelines. It redirects searches. It reframes intent from sudden eruption to controlled sequence, a plan executed in parts rather than a single reckless moment. The pathologist records stature, approximate weight, and general health, notes prior conditions, and fixes the window of death as tightly as the evidence allows. Time of death is never a single number. It is a range that narrows as indicators converge: body temperature, lividity, rigor, and the context reported by first responders. When a community craves certainty, science honors uncertainty honestly and refuses to pretend beyond the data. The voiceover holds a respectful distance. Beverly is not reduced to what was done to her. She is a mother, a daughter, a person whose life contained chapters beyond this terrible page. The narration names facts and refuses spectacle. No reenactments, no slow-motion cruelty. Only what is needed so the next steps rest on truth rather than appetite for drama. Precision is a form of respect, is This is the pivot point familiar to viewers of cold case files: careful documentation, outliving grief. Slides, swabs, seals, signatures. Each small discipline becomes a bridge to later years. When techniques improve and courage to reopen a box returns. On screen, a resources card appears and holds. If you or someone you know has experienced sexual assault, help is available. Below Rain National Sexual Assault, hotline 1-800-656-HOPE 4673, online, rain.org 24/7. Beside it, National Domestic Violence Hotline 1-800-799-7233, the hotline, org. A final line: if you are outside the United States, check local listings for confidential services. The card lingers long enough for viewers to copy the numbers before the story continues. The autopsy concludes with cause and manner of death recorded, evidence repackaged, and custody transferred. That conclusion is not closure. It is the foundation beneath the courtroom. Respect looks like this: correct names, careful words, and an insistence that even when we discuss harm, we do not replicate it. When the report leaves the lab, it carries a promise to a future jury and to a son who grew up waiting. The truth was measured. Precision is respect. So is restraint. The camera exits the room the way it entered without haste and returns us to investigators assembling a narrative from verified parts. The next chapter will test patience, but it will not betray the facts written here. The report leaves the lab and returns to a town already adjusting itself. Porch lights flip on before sunset. Deadbolts twist with the small click you hear at closing time. Kids who once wandered until street lights come up are home while the sky is still apricot. Coaches move practice earlier. Choir rehearsal ends at dusk. Parents drive the long way around Ford and Gottfredson even if it costs 10 extra minutes, because avoiding a corner feels like protection. Curfews inch earlier across blocks. The local paper runs a careful front page Beverly's name in a headline that feels too large for a human life. The 6 o'clock broadcast shows a map, 2 points circled, and a reporter standing near yellow tape drooping like tired ribbon. Neighbors give interviews in a hush reserved for sanctuaries. A teacher says she's telling students to walk in pairs. A hardware store sells out of motion lights in a single afternoon. In living rooms, conversation is practical and coded. Who has a spare flashlight? Do you know where the cat is at 8? Should we change the route to middle school drop-off? The tone is not panic, but choreography. A community rehearsing safety like a new hymn. Minds learn the exits in every room. Car keys live on the hook, not the counter. Windows are checked twice. And when you leave the house, the world looks rearranged. The parking lot at the big box store feels too open. The park seems too quiet. The grocery aisle is suddenly a hallway with mirrors. You start scanning faces at the grocery store. You catch your own reflection and wonder what you look like to someone who studies routines. Normal hasn't vanished. It has simply grown careful. And careful can feel like fear when it settles in for a season. Caution becomes routine, and investigators turn first to the people nearest to Beverly because probability, not prejudice, points that way. Interviews are recorded, paced, and designed to invite detail rather than drama. They begin with the man who once shared her mailbox and holidays the ex-husband. He describes a workday morning clocked in before 8, a foreman who can vouch, co-workers who remember a briefing, and a desk phone call that left a timestamp. Detectives telescope the hours into checkpoints. Where were you at 8:15 a.m.? Who saw you at 9 Huzzers? Which route did you drive? And why that one? They listen for practice and for the quiet patches where certainty should live. They ask about arguments that cooled and those that smoldered. When the hour ends, they have a narrative pinned to clocks and corroboration. It is not absolution. It is ballast against speculation. Next comes the boyfriend, the man in her present tense. He produces a delivery log, mileage sheets, a dispatcher's radio entry from miles north of town, and a time-stamped fuel receipt that takes no side at all. He is defensive and tired. The detectives let the paperwork talk. An odometer does not grieve. A receipt does not soothe. His story matches his documents, and the map on the corkboard keeps him outside the crucial window. At the precinct whiteboard, someone prints two phrases in neat caps: proximity bias and tunnel vision. They are warnings, not insults. Proximity bias is the shortcut that says the nearest person must be the most likely culprit: ex-spouses, current partners, close kin. Sometimes proximity explains a crime. Sometimes it only explains attention. Tunnel vision is the next trap once you fall in love with a theory. Every new fact bends to fit it, and contradictions get relabeled as noise. So the team counterweights instinct with structure. A second set of eyes reviews every interview summary. A third checks alibi corroborations, time cards, landline logs, bank stamps, and any storefront camera that still works after a Midwestern summer. The standard is not, do I believe this person, but does the data constrain the timeline enough to exclude them? Belief is a mood. Exclusion is math. The questions return to the domestic sphere anyway, because it holds context you cannot get from asphalt. Who argued recently? Who reconciled? Who still had a key? Who knew she sometimes pulled over to collect herself before the next errand? Answers sharpen a portrait without turning it into a silhouette of guilt. For the window that matters, the ex-husband's routine stays pinned to witnesses and clocks. The boyfriend's route keeps him miles away when the morning splits open. Investigators widen the ring to friends, co-workers, neighbors who noticed patterns, and acquaintances who knew routes. They check for restraining orders filed and never served, for calls made and never logged, for small frictions that grow barbs under pressure. They keep a ledger of opportunity and access, adding and subtracting as receipts arrive. When they step back, no victory music plays. They correct the map and move outward by one careful ring. This story will not yield to hunches pressed into familiar shapes. It will yield to timelines that refuse to lie, to records that refuse to misremember, and to the discipline of questions that stay useful when easy answers glitter. The next call sheet is already printing. Somewhere, the right door is waiting to be knocked on at the right minute, and the right voice is waiting to be heard, because patience, like evidence, compounds over time. Clearing is not forgiving, it is simply narrowing the field today. They circle a name and feel the static of momentum. The man drives a sedan, knows the park, and has a temper that flickers in bar fights. Someone swears his car looks like the one with the white top. Someone else recalls seeing him near Cherry Hill days before. It is enough to open the file wider and put fresh ink on the board. The team moves with earned caution surveillance, interviews, consensual swabs, a search if probable cause can carry it. For 3 days, the board blooms with arrows addresses, cross streets, a DMV photo taped beside the Fairmont. Then the facts begin the quiet work of subtraction. The time card that seemed doctored is merely misfiled. The supervisor misremembered because shifts were chaotic. The witness who was sure marks not certain when shown 2 similar vehicles at the same angle. The sedan is blue, yes, but the roof is solid, not vinyl. The man's alibi, once an offhand claim, hardens under receipts and phone logs. By week's end, the probable becomes improbable, then simply wrong. The circle around his name is erased with the kind of patience that feels like defeat. A diagonal smudge remains like a bruise on the whiteboard. The detectives refuse to hate the eraser. Correction is its own form of respect. Still, when the door to the briefing room closes, the room breathes a fraction heavier. They have been here before and will be again. tips thin as summer passes, then snap when the first cold fronts rake the maples. The newspaper moves the story off page 1. A new case roars in with louder urgency. Evidence sits. Attention thins. Leads that might have lived if called Tuesday start to die by Thursday. The board empties until it looks like a stage set of investigation rather than the work itself. 3 photos stay Beverly: the car, the grass. Someone pins a small card under them. Keep faith with the facts, because faith, at this point, needs an object. As Cold Case Files often shows, the worst winter is a cold case winter. It is not dramatic, it is daily work. Computers age, contacts move. A detective retires and takes 1,000 instincts home in his bones. Another inherits the file and must relearn the case from page 1. They box the case with a tactful label active, limited leads, and return to it on Fridays when time allows. Time allowing becomes its own euphemism, brittle at the edges. The lab report reads like a promise written in a handwriting no one can yet decipher. The SAE kit waits behind a seal that will travel years to find the right pair of hands. Swabs do not sour like memory. Paper bags do not lose patience. At night, one detective a decade later will still pull the folder free, sit at a desk lit like a shoreline, and reread the first week like scripture timeline, map, autopsy, kit. He searches for the ineffable sense that something important was glanced at and set down, like keys laid on the wrong counter. He leaves a sticky note. Look again at park exit paths, recheck phone tree, fiber origin. The note yellows. Another replaces it. The case cools in the only way cases cool, by continuing to exist without resolution. It waits. It keeps its temperature below threshold of noise while the world celebrates headlines built on immediacy. In the quiet, the facts remain the adults in the room. Wind still rolls the grass. Somewhere, a person believes time has granted him a second identity unconnected. Time can be generous. It can also be precise. The house learns a new choreography after the board thins and the calls slow. Dale is 13 and older than 13, reading adults' faces like weather. He does middle school things: homework, laps in gym, the cafeteria calculus, while measuring every afternoon against the last morning he said goodbye. He grows in uneven spurts, all elbows an apology, and learns that grief isn't a storm, but a climate. Teachers mark him quiet, capable, meaning he turns work in on time and never startles the room. He doesn't ask for late passes, though time arrives late for him. Grandparents pad the kitchen with new rituals. His grandfather pins a calendar and draws a small star on the 18th of each month. His grandmother overcooks the roast on Thursdays because she is thinking of something else and won't say what. Dale sets the table without being asked, rinses the glass in the sink, hears a pause collect in the room, and decides whether to fill it or leave it alone. Ambiguous loss is like that, a presence that behaves like an absence. He keeps his backpack by the door, shoes paired like sentries, and practices ordinary as though it were a sport. High school arrives with distractions: driver's ed, a shelf-stocking job, a coach who swears he runs like someone with somewhere to be. He dates carefully, laughs with friends, and carries a wallet photo that turns his pocket into an ache. A counselor offers a tool. Your mother is gone and not completely gone. He learns ritual is an anchor, not a cage. One pair of headphones for the bus, another for nights he wants sleep without the school bell replaying. He writes her birthday into a calendar before he owns a phone to remind him. College is a 2-hour drive in a different sky. He chooses a major others call practical, and he calls necessary a way to organize what refuses to organize itself. In dorm kitchens, he tells small stories, the way some people show empty hands. He saves the whole story for the few who earn it. Holidays become a braid of remembering and improvising. Some years he can't get home on the date. so he stands under unfamiliar streetlights and keeps time anyway. He marries a woman who says the right thing once. "You don't owe me the tidy version." They agree grief gets a chair at the table, but not the head. When a son is born, terror and joy rise together like two hands making one grip. He times commutes to drop-offs and pickups, turns ordinary minutes into shields, and learns the difference between caution and captivity. They choose sidewalks and streetlights that blink on before he needs them. Work becomes a place where competence is a language for love. He's the colleague who anticipates problems and lists two fixes with costs in numbers. He keeps 18th open, not as absence, but maintenance. On that day, he texts his grandmother's friend, donates to a victim's nonprofit, cleans trunk, and replaces a battery. You keep a photo by the door so you don't forget to remember. When the case resurfaces with new science, he doesn't celebrate. He sets a glass down, exhales, and lets hope be neither enemy nor performance. Ambiguous loss taught him to live with unfinished sentences. Adulthood taught him to finish what can be finished. Whatever the courtroom delivers, he knows what his family already accomplished. They kept the light on. A porch bulb changed at dusk. A calendar star drawn each month. A boy grown into a man who knows love isn't the opposite of grief. It's the instrument that tunes it low enough to live with. The light the family kept becomes useful in a different room, a lab where patience lives on shelves. What investigators documented years ago, the SAE kit sealed, signed, and stored wasn't just evidence. It was a savings account for a future that didn't exist yet. Inside that paper and tape are swabs, clippings, and slides that were once too faint for the tools of 1989. Now, preservation pays off. Scientists coax whatever genetic material remains from those samples, treat it gently, and run it through next-generation sequencing. Instead of reading a few genetic markers and stopping, the machines read hundreds of thousands. Each tiny fragment is like a torn page. Software realigns those pages until a readable chapter appears, a DNA profile suitable for comparison beyond the narrow tests of the past. Chain of custody makes this possible. Careful storage keeps noise from masquerading as truth. Plain English, think of DNA as a book written with 4 letters. Old methods looked for a few specific words and asked, do they match someone already in the police library? That's CODIS, the national system that stores profiles from convicted offenders, arrestees where allowed, and unsolved crimes using a standard set of short tandem repeat markers. It's fast, standardized, and effective when the offender's words are already shelved. But if the suspect never had a profile in that library, CODIS can sit silent for years. A perfect crime scene profile might wait in the dark simply because there is nothing identical to compare it to. Next-generation sequencing changes the question. It lets labs read far more of the book, enough to notice family resemblances, chapters, and paragraphs, not just keywords. That unlocks a second path known as forensic genetic genealogy, or FGG. Instead of asking, is this exact person in the police library, investigators ask, does this unknown DNA resemble anyone in consumer genealogy databases where people voluntarily uploaded data to learn about ancestry? If distant relatives appear second cousins, third cousins, kin, you'd only meet at a reunion. Genealogists build family trees that move from the 1800s to the present, trimming branches with public records, birth and death certificates, obituaries, addresses, court files, and newspaper clippings. From a cluster of relatives, they narrow by age, sex, location at the time of the crime, and known life details. What emerges is not a verdict. It's a short list of living candidates. None of this is guesswork. It's scaffolding. CODIS is like searching a phone by exact number instant if you have it. FGG is like searching by last name and city, then walking the neighborhood with a map. Consent and policy matter. Only certain databases permit law enforcement use for violent crimes and unidentified remains, and investigators follow those terms. When a likely person appears, traditional investigation resumes interviews, records, timelines, and when lawful, a known reference sample confirms or refutes the lead. FGG does not replace proof. It generates leads strong enough to justify getting it. For a case like Beverly's, the contrast is everything. The SAE kit preserved under low-tech becomes high-tech the moment it's reopened. CODIS answered no match for decades because the exact profile wasn't present. Next-generation sequencing answered a different question. Who might this person be related to? That answer didn't hand over a name. It handed over a neighborhood of names and invited investigators to knock with care. When the lab returned a well-supported tree and a likely branch living within driving distance of the crime scenes, detectives could focus. They compared ages, vehicles, work histories, and geography. They looked for overlaps with parks, shifts, and the morning window we traced. And then they stepped back into the oldest part of police work observation, ready to see if the science and the streets were describing the same person. The first matches arrive like faint constellations, tiny points of shared DNA out on the edge of relatedness. Not parents, not siblings, not even first cousins. These are third cousins, sometimes once removed. People who might recognize each other's last names only in a shoebox of old photographs. Still, patterns emerge. The lab's report lists centimorgans shared, the genetic yardage that implies distance on the family map. One match traces to a Midwestern line of farmers, another to an aunt who moved north for factory work in the 1950s. A third carries a surname that rings through county obituaries like a bell. None of them is the person who hurt Beverly. All of them are pieces of the person's puzzle. Genealogists do the slow, beautiful labor that true investigation requires. They start in the past, where records are public, persistent, and stubborn about the truth. Census pages, marriage licenses, probate postings, draft cards, grave markers, each document becomes a branch. From those branches, they prune and graft who had children. Where did those children go? Which lines stayed in Michigan? Which drifted? Which changed their names at Ellis Island, or by marriage, or by whim? It is detective work without a badge, governed by dates and places rather than adrenaline. A family tree lifts out of the paper and begins to cast shade. Two clusters stand out. One cluster's descendants thinned across the plains, wish them well and move on. The other cluster settled and resettled within a wider orbit of Detroit, Macomb, and Washtenaw counties, filling school rosters, union rolls, and church directories. The unknown contributor to the 1989 DNA kit is almost certainly a male from this latter branch, of a generation old enough in 1989 to drive, to own, to stalk a morning. Genealogy is inference, but it is disciplined inference. Before any name is spoken, the tree must agree with the clock. Ethics live beside the research. Only databases that permit law enforcement access for violent crimes and unidentified remains are used, and only by explicit terms public uploads with opt-in consent. No consumer account is cracked. No private profile is scraped. Investigators receive guidance and oversight. A written protocol governs what can be searched, what can be retained, and how to document each step so a judge and a jury can later see the rails the case ran on. The right to know and the right to privacy share the room. Both must be honored if either is to endure. Back to the tree. The third cousin matches, mapped against birth years and counties, produce a manageable field of living males who could, in 1989, have been present and capable. From 20, the list becomes 12, then 7. The work narrows with public records driver histories, registered addresses, property deeds, archived articles, yearbooks with faces that grew into the faces of men. A line on the board reads, "Overlap with Canton, Superior TWP 1988 to 1991. Another reads, "Access to vehicles similar to fare, no, not the car, the proximity to parks." One name surfaces and refuses to drift back under. He grew up within hours of the map's radii, worked jobs that touched the counties under question, and aged into the mid-60s the way the candidate profile predicted. His history is not a rap sheet of confessions, but there are seams, odd addresses, a gap that could be explained by a move across town, an association with a mounted unit that put him near fairgrounds and trailheads, places where habits can be watched without being noticed. The tree points, the records nod, and the calendar does not argue. Even now, the narration resists triumph. A name in a notebook is not a name in an indictment. It is a hypothesis asking to be tested by older, humbler tools. Detectives step from the glow of spreadsheets back into weather. They drive past old addresses, read the practical poetry of mailboxes, learn the rhythm of trash day. They look for a coffee cup tossed too casually, a straw left in a bin, the sort of ordinary discard that every person leaves behind and never considers evidence. The goal is not drama, it is clarity, one lawful, uncontaminated reference sample that can meet the 1989 profile and either refuse it or recognize it. Meanwhile, the genealogists keep the paper trail breathing. They cross-check obituaries to confirm relationships, prevent false branches, and ensure that the person in the detective's sights is not a cousin adjacent to the true contributor. The rule is relentless humility: verify grandparents, verify siblings, verify the second marriage that reconfigured the tree when no one was looking. Only when the branches withstand tugging does anyone say aloud what the board already implies. This is where the two crafts braid the patient historic work and the immediate street work. It is also the moment where viewers of cold case storytelling know to hold their breath. Viewers of cold case files know the tree ends at a front door. What happens on the porch depends on everything done before the knock consents honored, protocols obeyed, questions kept honest, and the discipline to let evidence speak first. The door will open, or it won't. A cup will be discarded, or it won't. Either way, the tree stands, rooted in records that cannot be shamed into lying, waiting for science to join it with a yes or a no that can carry weight into a courtroom. They do not knock first. They learn the rhythms. Trash day is Wednesday. The bin rolls curbside at dawn. The suspect collects mail just after lunch and favors a convenience store coffee he never finishes. Surveillance is uneventful by design, no car chases, no cinematic whispers, just the honest patience of watching a life that assumes it is unobserved. When a straw lands in a public receptacle, an officer in plain clothes retrieves the bag under lawful authority. When a paper cup arcs from a hand to a gas station can, it becomes evidence because it was discarded in a place where anyone could take it. No one trespasses. No one compels. The boundary lines are respected, and a chain of custody form blooms with times, locations, initials. In the lab, technicians wear the calm that complex work requires. Each item is unpacked, photographed, and swabbed with fresh gloves. Controls are run because controls are the grammar that keeps science speaking sense. Extraction lifts microscopic traces into solution. Quantitation measures whether there is enough to matter. Amplification builds what is faint without inventing what is not there. The resulting profile is a melody written in 4 notes, old as inheritance, new as the machine that reads it. Beside it on the screen waits the preserved profile from 1989, rebuilt by next-generation sequencing after decades in a sealed kit. The comparison is both simple and sacred loci against loci, alleles aligning like teeth in a zipper. The monitor doesn't exclaim, it resolves. Peaks agree where they should, and where the old skepticism kicks in. Statistics answer the likelihood ratio climbs beyond the reach of coincidence, past the place where maybe survives. 35 years reduced to base pairs and then expanded back into a person. The room exhales without cheering. A supervisor signs the report. Another reviewer signs again. Analysts write with courtroom readers in mind, tracing every reagent, every cycle, every moment a decision could have drifted and did not. The point is not the drama of a match. It is the durability of the match under questions asked by strangers in suits months from now. Detectives receive the call and experience the kind of silence that means work just got louder. This is not the end. It is the threshold where hypotheses become warrants, where a name steps out of the genealogy and into the investigative file with weight. The team meets, rechecks timelines, and drafts paperwork with the precision of people who know a wrong comma can stall justice. Outside, wind combs the trees, and somewhere a man resumes a routine that will not protect him much longer. Dawn is a practical hour for warrants. The neighborhood is soft with sprinklers and newspaper deliveries. The day has not yet scattered into 100 moving parts. Unmarked cars idle a block away. A team briefs one last time assignments, approach, contingencies, and then walks the plan they have rehearsed until it feels boring. Boring is the point, no surprises. No risks that do not serve the court that will read every line of this morning later. A knock. A pause calibrated to courtesy and safety. Identification announced in the clear. The door opens. Commands are simple, spoken in the slow voice that de-escalates. Hands are shown. Cuffs click. The suspect is informed, searched, seated. No speeches. No triumph. Documentation starts before the porch light clicks off. Inside, the warrant is read, and the search proceeds room by room. Each drawer that opens, each box that lifts, each item that leaves the residence for testing is photographed, described, sealed, and signed. The inventory reads like a ledger, not a headline. Ammunition is recovered, 45 caliber rounds stacked in a small plastic case, and a compatible magazine is logged. None of it is a conclusion. It is context that will later meet ballistics. Timelines. Electronic devices are collected under the terms of the warrant. Notebooks are bagged. Everything that might matter leaves in a labeled container that will one day sit beneath courtroom lights and simply exist. The suspect is transported, processed, and presented for an initial appearance. Charges are described with the conditional grammar the law prefers: alleged acts on a date certain, in a county named, against a victim named with respect. Prosecutors outline counts tied to homicide and sexual assault statutes. Defense counsel arrives at the first moment possible and makes the point that will echo through the case: a genetic match is evidence, not destiny. The court reminds everyone of the only assumption allowed in its walls, the presumption of innocence, and sets the procedural road ahead. Filings, discovery, hearings. Across town, a family sits at a kitchen table that knows all their seasons. A phone lights with the call they have both wanted and dreaded. There's been an arrest. They nod at the words without letting joy perform, because joy can feel like betrayal when the person you miss is not there to enjoy it. You imagine handcuffs after decades of sleeplessness, and then remember trials aren't a montage. They are calendars, motions, and days when nothing moves forward except patience. Back in the interview room, nothing theatrical happens. The suspect is advised of rights. Questions are offered. Answers are accepted or declined. Any statement taken is written as if it will be read cold years from now. If counsel instructs silence, silence is honored. Outside the room, detectives continue the arithmetic: banking records against routes, employment rosters against morning windows, park maintenance logs against someone's memory of a door left ajar on a Monday. When the public hears the news, it arrives in careful sentences. A press conference does what the moment allows: a name, the nature of charges, a timeline broad enough to inform and narrow enough to avoid harm. Reporters ask about the ammunition, the magazine, the discarded DNA. The sheriff answers within the rails of what is chargeable and what is fair to say. Community members bring candles to a park that remembers how engines sound at idle. The air feels cold even when the weather is kind, because grief changes temperature. The paperwork closes on a day that began before sunrise. The case does not. The story is no longer about whether an arrest will happen. It is about whether evidence patient, documented, and tested will be enough when strangers take oaths and listen. Patience will be tested again and again by all. The arrest changes the venue, but not the burden. In court, the temperature drops, procedure becomes the language. A calendar replaces adrenaline. First come advisements, counsel appearances, and a bail hearing that measures risk, not outrage. Prosecutors point to the DNA match, the two-scene staging, and ammunition recovered under warrant. They argue the offense is grave, the community interest compelling, and the incentive to flee real. The defense counters that the client has long-standing ties to the area and no record of flight. Conditions, they say, can manage risk. Motions follow like chess openings with names to suppress, to exclude, to compel. One challenges the lawfulness of the discarded item collection. Another questions the scope of the residential search. A third seeks limits on charged rhetoric, no execution style, no predator because words can convict before evidence does. The judge listens more than speaks, sets briefing schedules, and reminds both tables that the jury box is a promise, not a prop. Discovery is its own marathon. The state turns over lab reports, chain of custody logs, photographs, extraction notes, and the statistical scaffolding behind the genetic match. The defense retains experts to re-examine the analytics, were controls clean, thresholds appropriate, mixtures resolved, stochastic effects acknowledged, and contamination risk mitigated. They request raw files for independent review. No one in the room treats DNA like magic. Education becomes part of advocacy. DNA is powerful evidence. Juries still require narrative coherence. Meanwhile, both sides audition themes. The prosecution leans on persistence and care-preserved evidence, improved science, corroborating circumstances, and a community that waited without forgetting. The defense leans on doubt and time degradation, innocent transfer, alternative explanations, and the hazard of confirmation bias when an old file thaws under bright lights. Each table drafts openings the jurors have not yet heard, but will soon be asked to weigh against their instructions. Bail arguments return as hearings progress. Prosecutors cite seriousness and likely sentencing exposure. Defense emphasizes compliance history and the viability of bond with electronic monitoring. The court balances liberty against safety, not headlines. Orders issue no contact with the victim's family, surrender of firearms, travel limits, and appearances set with metronomic steadiness. Jury instructions wait down the hall like guardrails, presumption of innocence, burden of proof, credibility, expert testimony, and the careful use of scientific exhibits. The judge will warn against sympathy and speculation alike, steering attention toward evidence and lawful inference. By the last pretrial conference, the case file has thickened into a portable archive. What the public calls closure, the court calls process. And process, by design, is slow enough to be fair. Calendars turn, 3 weeks at a time, one motion at a time. The matter advances toward the only room where facts receive their final public reading. The pace is deliberately human. The courtroom's calendar recedes, and we return to the human terrain that started this case. Begin with victimology, the careful study of routine to understand vulnerability without blame. Beverly's mornings matched a pattern shared by millions drop a child at school. take a breath, run an errand, plan the day. That breath, the post-drop-off lull, created a predictable window. In the logic of opportunity, predictability is both comfort and map. Temporal vulnerability is not negligence. It is the minute when the clock offers an opening. Public routines rush hour. Crowded lots carry social friction that pushes back. Semi-private routines a quiet shoulder. A small park lower that friction just enough for a motivated person to act. Beverly's predictability school first, then the next thing may have narrowed the field for anyone studying her movements. The half hour after 8:30 a.m. becomes a hinge on which the day can be forced. Transport control between scenes turns the crime from eruption into sequence. A body found in tall grass and a running car at a park argue for separation in time and place. Separation is logistics, and logistics imply planning enough to move a person, manage a vehicle, and decide where discovery should happen and where it should not. The decision to split scenes also tries to split narrative. Investigators must solve not one problem but two, while the connective tissue minutes, fibers, and chance alignment has to be rebuilt grain by grain. Now, offender dynamics, phrased with caution because psychology describes patterns, not verdicts. The behavior set resembles instrumental violence, where harm is a means to an end: control, sexual access, silencing rather than an ungoverned burst of rage. Instrumental offenders prioritize space and time. They choose sites with partial cover and predictable foot traffic. They watch clocks, neighbors, and escape corridors. They bring or stage what they think they will need. They often minimize contact, leave vehicles idling, place belongings to mislead, keep scenes tidy enough to thin the trail. Control of space and time also appears in micro decisions: where to stop, how long to stop, when to re-enter traffic, whether to pass cameras, how to balance witness risk against the need to relocate. In that calculus, the offender counts on something suburbs provide in abundance: ambient cover. Lawns are mowed, deliveries made, tires patched, hundreds of small sounds that camouflage movement. On a weekday morning, anonymity is the mask. Community psychology completes the picture, because crimes are lived in neighborhoods long after tape comes down. Years of vigilance teach people to rewrite the neighborhood. Routes alter, shortcuts vanish, mental maps detour around corners that once felt safe. Parents rehearse scripts with kids about carpools and what to do if someone calls your name from a car. Businesses keep lights brighter and install mirrors that widen sightlines. Blocks build phone trees, then group texts, then a norm of sharing verified updates instead of rumor. Vigilance has costs. Hyper-alertness taxes sleep, frays patience, and can turn hospitality into suspicion. Recovery requires rituals that restore control without deepening fear-walking clubs at dusk. Better lighting on paths, town hall updates that favor facts, victim-first memorials that refuse spectacle. A culture of see something. Say something works only when paired with verify before you amplify. For families, the psychology of ambiguous loss lingers even when a suspect is named. Ambiguous loss means holding two truths at once: the past cannot be repaired, and the future still asks to be lived well. Rituals emerge because rituals restore agency. Lighting a porch at dusk, drawing a star on a calendar date, telling the story without gore. These are quiet reparations a community can practice with the family, not on the family. Finally, the guardrail beneath any profile patterns explain risk. They do not assign certainty. Investigative psychology offers hypotheses to be tested against evidence. It helps ensure that when the story reaches a jury, facts do not arrive alone. They arrive with context about how routine becomes opportunity and how, even after decades, disciplined attention can reverse that conversion. Here's what forensic genetic genealogy teaches, beyond headlines. Decades-old sexual assault kits aren't relics. They're time capsules built by people who believed the future would show up. When a kit is sealed, labeled, and stored in paper, not plastic, it guards the sample from moisture and slow decay. When a clerk initials the seal and logs every transfer, that act becomes the spine of a case. Years later, a laboratory can open the box, document the condition, and trust that what's inside is what left the victim's body, not hope, not contamination. Chain of custody is the thread that keeps the story straight. Each signature, date, is a receipt that says this sample traveled safely. Without that thread, the best science wobbles. With it, next-generation sequencing can rescue whispers from damaged DNA, reading more genetic markers than earlier methods. Those reads produce a profile strong enough to search two ways. Plain English CODIS asks, is this exact person already in the police library? It returns a hit only if the offender's profile is on file. Forensic genetic genealogy asks, who might this person be related to? Using opt-in consumer databases that allow law enforcement searching. Genealogists look for distant relatives, then build family trees from public records, census pages, obituaries, marriage licenses, and investigators narrow by age, geography, and opportunity. A candidate name becomes a hypothesis that must survive interviews, timelines, maps, and a lawful reference sample. Laboratory rigor never leaves the room. Technicians photograph before touching, change gloves between swabs, and run negative controls so the instruments prove themselves clean. Documentation travels with every tube, because evidence without paperwork is just opinion with better lighting. Why cold case files so often returns to DNA it doesn't forget. Preserved. It can outlast memory and rumor, and carry a voice forward until truth can answer. Before we finish, we owe you the boundaries that keep stories like this humane. Privacy is not a nuisance, it is the other half of truth. Genealogy searches are limited to databases that explicitly allow law enforcement use for violent crimes and unidentified remains. No private accounts are broken, no secrets scraped. Every search should be documented and reviewable, because a result that can't be audited doesn't deserve to be trusted. Victim-first framing means Beverly remains the center of gravity. We say her name, not just the case. We focus on process, not spectacle. We describe harm clinically, not graphically. We also avoid narrative shortcuts that turn a life into an outline. Her family owns their story. Our job is to hold it with care. We do not glamorize the suspected offender. No slow-motion walk-ups. No sensational thumbnails. No clever taglines. The public's right to know is real. So is the responsibility not to feed fascination with cruelty. When we show items seized or read from a filing, we do it to explain evidence, not to decorate fear. We choose verbs that resist bias. Alleged, not assumed. Described, not decided. Science can be moving, but it is not a mood. It is methods plus documentation. Whenever possible, we link claims to records you can read yourself. On screen, a simple card holds, all defendants are presumed innocent unless proven guilty. That sentence disciplines the rest. Finally, a promise to the audience that built cold case files into a community we will make room for nuance, for correction, and for silence when details would only injure. If you share this episode, do it to help memory, not to chase views. If you know something, tell investigators, not the comments. Compassion is a technique. Truth needs patience, proportion, context, and care from everyone. We return to the curb where the morning began, under a pale September sky. Brick school, bell, a hug across a bench seat, now every detail carries weight. We follow the route again, a quiet pullover, a crossroads, the tall grass that hid more absence than blood, and the blue Fairmont idling at Griffin Park with the door ajar. What once felt like scattered images now aligns two scenes, One design, a story that split itself to slow the truth, and the science that stitched it back together. Dale lives with both versions of that day, the ordinary and the altered, and chooses not to let either define him alone. He builds a family, shows up to the obligations that keep a life steady, and marks September with rituals that are tender without being theatrical. He keeps grace practical, a needed call, a donation in his mother's name, a light left on when dusk arrives early. Resilience. Here isn't a slogan. It's a calendar you keep on purpose. The community learns its own durable kindness. Routes changed in fear become paths reclaimed in company block walks at sunset, better lighting along the park trail, a habit of checking facts before forwarding rumors. Each year, more people stand at the edge of the grass with candles and the right kind of silence. Ordinary returns, but wiser. Safety returns, but shared. When the case finally reached a new season, it did not erase the years between. It offered something: measured accountability pursued with care, and the reminder that evidence outlives us. Call it what it is: justice delayed but not denied. Not a triumph, but a clearing of fog. We end where she said goodbye and promised more: a curb, a kiss to a teenage brow, and a mother who deserved a long afternoon that never arrived. Before we fade out, a final ask with purpose. If you lived near Ford and Gottfredson or visited Griffin Park in September 1989, if you remember a car idling, a door left open, a hurried figure, share it with the Washtenaw County Sheriff's Office. One detail can still matter. If this story resonated, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It helps surface the next case that needs light. Comment where you're watching from and what detail stayed with you. Share this video with someone who loves cold case files and believes science should finish what memory started. Credits reporting from public records and court filings. Timeline verified against contemporary coverage. Victim first advisors. Production by Silent Evidence. Music licensed. Research assistance, archival newspapers, and open source genealogy. Special thanks to survivors and families who keep the porch light on. Until next time, be kind, be careful, and keep the truth in view, always.